The following segment is sponsored by Smith Injury Law and 300hurt.com.
An unexpected turn of events could leave anyone in need of good legal representation, even in these times of pandemic. Whether it's a car crash, an accident at work, or a disability claim, we turn to Richard Smith of Smith Injury Law. Good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning, Margaret.
As everybody works to protect themselves and their loved ones from COVID, we're talking about workers' comp cases related to COVID. Obviously, COVID isn't your typical workers' comp case, but what are you seeing out there?
Well, Margaret, it's an occupational disease claim. So basically, if you are a healthcare worker or somebody who can prove that you got COVID-19 from your employment and that you were at a higher risk to get COVID-19 than the average population, then you have a potential occupational disease claim. Now, we see this often when it comes to healthcare workers, or EMS people, or people that we know that their job is to treat or handle people who have COVID-19. And
workers
would be the right ones mostly to bring a claim, but anybody can bring one. It just makes it more difficult if you don't have a direct connection to treating or handling COVID-19 patients.
Okay, and in getting into that, there's a difference between healthcare workers being exposed and people in other types of jobs, right?
That's true. Now, if you're in a job where you are basically required to interact with the public and you're not provided the proper equipment and you can prove it happened on the job, there's a possibility that's a claim also. So I'm not saying don't look into it if you have COVID, and it has to be a serious injury. So obviously, if you have COVID and it's no symptoms or mild symptoms, it's not something that you want to pursue. But obviously, if somebody passes away, their family could pursue the claim. Or if you have serious permanent injuries that require, lung damage, that kind of thing, you could certainly look at bringing a occupational disease claim then.
If somebody gets sick because of where they work, they would have to prove that they're at greater risk because of their job than they would be in their normal life. And that's a high standard, right?
It definitely, but like I said, if you're somebody who is an ER nurse, for example, and you're treating COVID patients, you can certainly argue that you're at a higher risk for getting COVID than somebody who's working from home, for example. So we know that these cases are being brought now by other attorneys, and the thing is that they're all being denied by the workers' comp carriers, or at least most of them are. I haven't heard of one yet that's been accepted. So if you have a situation where a loved one or family member was a healthcare worker or somebody exposed to COVID and they passed away or they have serious injuries, please call us, because these claims can be brought, and I think brought successfully.
Mm-hmm. And so like you're saying, workers' comp likely to deny it, a claim that a worker got COVID on the job. What changes when you've got an experienced attorney on the case? What can an experienced attorney do?
Well, we have to try to prove the case. We have to prove, how do they get it? And I think it's pretty simple. We have to get an expert, I would assume, but it'd be pretty simple to prove that somebody who works with COVID patients as a ER physician, nurse, EMT, somebody who's working with them on a regular basis, is certainly at a greater risk than the common everyday person who's not working in that field. So that's the kind of case that I think is going to be successful. It's much tougher when you're looking at people that work like in grocery stores, for example. Mm-hmm. Yes, they may be exposed to people, but maybe not more than the average citizen is, who's also working in a job that puts them in contact with the public. So you can see how that gets more difficult the farther away you get from a job that's attached to the actual treatment of COVID patients.
Absolutely. Well, certainly a topic of a lot of interest these days, but you handle a lot at Smith Injury Law. Tell us about your growing practice and your specialties there.
Well, we do unbilled accidents, workers' compensation, Social Security disability claims in both South Carolina and North Carolina. And the case we're talking about with COVID would be considered an occupational disease workers' comp claim. There's a lot of been talk in Washington, D.C. about limiting liability for employers. Well, actually, in South Carolina, it's already limited. If you're an employee, you can't sue your employer. You can only pursue a workers' compensation claim. Now, the cases I think they're talking about is if somebody walks into a restaurant, for example, and they get COVID, it's going to be very difficult to prove that you got it from the restaurant and not from someplace else. So I don't think it's nearly as big of a liability problem as people think it is. As long as you follow the CDC guidelines, wear a mask, socially distance, do things that are important to do, your chances of being sued by some other person for coming into your establishment and getting the disease, I think is very, very limited. But you do need to be careful about your employees, especially if your employees are working with the public, especially those who work with COVID patients.
All right. Well, a lot of questions people have, a lot of concerns, and people can get in touch with you, Richard Smith, by calling 300-HURT or visit 300hurt.com. Richard Smith of Smith Injury Law. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Margaret.